Greetings, everyone. Welcome to Virtual Dalcroze Meetup number 54, which is pretty exciting. I'm pretty impressed with us to have had this many times together and still attracting quite a nice crowd. You should see the people on this call. It's a pretty impressive lot, I got to tell you. We have a nice really rich meetup planned for today. Plenty to do, nowhere near enough time to get through these interesting people and conversations. So I just want to say welcome. My name is Stephen Neely. I'm your co-host for the 54th Virtual Dalcroze Meetup. I'm here with my dear friends and colleagues, Veronica Bileski and Emma Shubin. And I think what we're going to do today is just immediately get going as quick as we can. And Veronica and Emma, I'm sure, will jump in with all of their words as we get going. Our tradition is to take 3 minutes here at the top and make a couple really quick breakout rooms and give everybody a chance just to say hi for a minute. And so I'm going to throw you into 3 different rooms. When you get there, please, if you're willing, introduce yourself. Tell everybody your name, where are you from, and who do you teach? Or who did you used to teach, or who do you want to teach? Or those are the assumptions. So get ready. It's a short little round robin intro, and then I'm going to pull you right back in 2.5 minutes. Ready, set, go. All right. Well, we're back, whether you jumped out of the breakout room too fast or not. It's just enough time to be like, these are some really interesting people. I wish I had more time to say hi to them, which is why, of course, you keep coming back to the VDM. Before we get into our content for today, Veronica, do you want to help us with an announcement or two?
Yeah, so we have 3 master classes scheduled for the next few months. The next one is with Aneta Pasternak on March 18th or 19th, depending on where in the world you live. And then Cynthia Lilly is coming up after that, and after that we'll have Kai Liu. So maybe Stephen and Emma could just say a couple more words about Aneta and why people should check out her class.
Yeah, Emma, do you want to lead?
Aneta is extraordinary. If you haven't had a chance to take a class with her in person, which I assume many of you have not, I would highly recommend it. What's happening in Poland is always cutting edge and always fascinating, and music that feels modern, but then you stop and think about it and you realize it's not, and it's done in such a musical and in-depth way that you'll be working with sounds that you never knew could be so beautiful and so musical and so interesting, and the movement work that they do is unbelievable. So I'm very excited to see and hear what she has to do. Anything Aneta brings is the highest of levels and the most simply presented in just masterful teaching. So I think you will be really engaged, and there'll be something in there that you thought, wow, I've never seen anybody do this before, and I may never see it again. So you definitely don't want to miss it.
Yeah, there is something about the Polish Dalcroze community that just is a little bit specific and really impressive. So if you haven't hung out with any of that crowd yet, it's worth going just to sort of get close to some of those attentions. Then our dear friend Cynthia Lilly from New York City will do the next master class. Cynthia is a master teacher, has such wonderful ideas, and her influences, are very much that New York Dalcroze school, and so it's really fun to work with her, and it's definitely someone to hit. And then Kai Liu, I'm extra excited about Kai. I've only had a chance to run into him in Switzerland. Every couple of years, we sit in on some classes together. He's this genius dude who's a master musician. He's a jazz player. He's got a really big brain, and he's so nice. And so I'm just really thrilled to get to feature him here. So there's some master classes coming up. I think we're also just reminding everybody, and then we're going to talk about this at the end, so I'm just going to say it really fast and then we'll get to it. There are 2 really big deal conferences coming up this summer, actually the 2 Dalcroze International conferences that happen every so often. So the Congress in Geneva at the Institut Jacques Dalcroze is a once every 4-year conference, and that is hitting this summer in the middle of July. And then the International Conference of Dalcroze Studies happens every other year and will be on my campus here in Pittsburgh at Carnegie Mellon University the first week of August. And so we are trying to push everybody to do your best to get to all of the things. These things only come around every so often, and they're really quite special. So we hope everybody will consider organizing your life and go get some great connections made. Veronica?
Okay, yeah. So Joe and Graham, thank you so much for being here. Joe is gonna speak with us for 5 minutes to start, if that's okay, and I'll be your timekeeper. I'll give you a 1-minute warning, and then Graham will go straight to yours, same deal. And then afterwards, I'm hoping we can have a really rich discussion, and then we'll stop that about 15 minutes before the hour and move on to the part with Emma and Stephen and talking more about those summer things, and I'll introduce that when the time comes. So let's start with Joe. Thank you so much for being here.
I'm going to jump in just for half a second, just to say both Graham and Joe have like gobs of stuff they could talk about for hours. I'm just 100% sure of it. We saw both of them actually at the National Dalcroze Conference, had a chance to interact with both of them a bit. And these are rich teachers. And so I hope that Graham and Joe won't be too frustrated that things are tight. We will hope to have you back to do more and more in the future. So everybody, this is just the teeniest little drop in the bucket. Joe, you're on.
Okay. I've been teaching the work of Delsarte and studying for about, I think, 27 years now. A distinction I like to make is I do not teach Delsarteism in the same way you do not teach Dalcrozeism. I teach the theory and practices as taught by Delsarte. He lived from 1811 to 1871 and began teaching in 1838 his course in applied aesthetics in Paris. And what we have is some very, very valuable foundations of virtually all somatic practices. Laban studied Delsarte, Dalcroze studied Delsarte, Isadora Duncan was a Delsarte teacher before she became Isadora Duncan, the dancer. Alexander had a card as a Delsarte teacher. Ruth St. Denis and Ted Shawn were Delsarte teachers. The teacher of Fred Astaire and choreographer for him was a Delsarte teacher. We can go on and on and on. My job today is to give you a little taste of what the fundamental theory is and how revolutionary it was at the time to consider it and how it could become a foundation for so many things. It can be helpful to think of him as a contemporary of Darwin. They were contemporaries, and that can give us a little bit of perspective. Darwin also set out to find out the mysteries of God and discovered evolution. And Delsarte was trying to find the mysteries of God and discovered principles of human expression and movement. He includes some of that in his religious seekings, in his teachings and his explanations, but we as moderns know how to separate a person's religion from their theories that they uncover. So we can manage that, I think. So he started out with a principle. I'll run through the fundamentals for us now. He said, if I start with anatomy, I understand the structure of the organism. From the structure of the organism, I can infer physiology. What do these parts do? Are they hinges? Are they stabbers? Are they grinders? Are they rotators? What do they do? From what they do, I can begin to infer analysis of function, which he called then semiotics. Can I see a grabber doing that? Then I know it's grabbing. If I know that, and that's a function that he refers to as semiotics, the interpretation of an action, then I can also reverse it and create aesthetics. I can choose an action to fulfill that impulse. And that was his definition of aesthetics. If I then substitute my will for the original impulse and create, that is art. So although he's credited with, often people discuss his work as an external system, as soon as he's talking about substituting our will for the original impulse, we're into modern acting method, inserting my will for the impulse and reproducing the action that that impulse would cause. So we have what is very valuable, an anatomical structure for human expression, not a cultural one. A very important distinction. So it was not how Europeans express themselves. He was trying to find out how the species expresses itself. He settled upon two principles, and these are not argued or debated at all by any theorists of Delsart's work: the law of correspondence and the principle of trinity. In brief, the law of correspondence has two major phases, sort of as the invisible, so the visible, and as the larger, so the smaller. So we would say we had an inside person and an outside person. As the inside emotions experience themselves, so the outside would move in correspondence. Also, it's a two-way street. As the outside experiences something, that has an effect on the inside. And as the larger, so the smaller applies to the idea that we find in a lot of somatic methods today, that maybe if there's a practice that says your hand can contain all the qualities of your whole self, that's as the larger, so the smaller. If you could find all of the principles in your foot that are in your whole self, that's as the larger, so the smaller. So there was the law of correspondence. To every movement, there is an action. To every action, or to every feeling, there is an action. To every action, there is a feeling. As the outside, so the inside, and as the larger, so the smaller.
John, 1 minute, please.
1 minute. Okay, Trinity, we find now as the idea of the three phases of human life: the mind, the body, and the spirit. For example, today is how we talk about it. That there are three main impulses: intellectual, emotional, and animal survival mechanisms of some type. We combine them and we get an inner trinity and an outer trinity, and a trinity on all the large parts and a trinity on all of the small parts, that any large part or small part can communicate the inside or the outside, and the inside mental, outside mental, emotional, or impulsive. Vital instinct. I think I kind of ran through it all.
Thank you so much. We will ask you more questions in just a second. Graham.
Wow, that was lovely. So I want to share just a quick little exploration and process that I have been using in the classroom, all about cross rhythms and polyrhythms. I want to back up and say that I, am a huge fan of, in general, like internet culture and memes. And I was approached quite often about, it seemed that like out on the internet, people trying to crunch out really complicated cross rhythms. And it seemed like kind of a trendy thing for a while. And so I'd have students come in and like kind of request like, hey, can we run through like a 3 against 4? Like, hey, I prepared a 3 against 4. And it would always be maybe sometime a little shaky. Yeah, they're kind of just like trying to hand fist their way through these divisions. And I wanted to kind of work with that, run with that. And so I developed essentially a process, an equation to sort out any cross rhythm, period. And so I want to run through this just 2 times, one with a very simple cross rhythm and another that's like a crazy one. So here, I have a little whiteboard over here. I'll write it up for you. All right, can you guys see that? Let me raise this up just a touch. So essentially, whenever I think about a cross rhythm, I have a base, and then I am putting another metric against that base. So for example, 4 against 3, you are putting 4 against a base of 3. And so I usually conceptualize it that way. And so the equation goes like this. I honestly write this out in like terms of like an algebra equation. Instead of 4 against 3, I can even just call it y against x. So I have a base of X. Oh, I can't quite see it. So 4 against 3. Make a measure with X amount of beats. And I just, draw up no values, just lines. Divide each beat into Y, into Y partials. Since then we have, we can call these, I like calling them 16th notes. And then the last process is regroup all of these partials into groups of X. So, here's our first one. 1, 2, 3. Here's our next one. And suddenly we have this really great division of this 4 sounds against 3. And we all know this cross rhythm: 1, a 2, and 3E. And I'll have them step the beat 1, 2, 3, and then have them clap the cross rhythm against that. Now this is an easy one. Of course, 1, 2. And then you can switch it, etc. And so then, of course, with this process, you can use much harder, much more difficult numbers. I think I was trying to think of a good one that's not too crazy for this little demo, and I think I'd like to do 5 against 4. 5 against 4. Of course, this gets interesting. So the process one more time. You start with a measure with X amount of beats, probably like a 4/4, but just start with lines. Divide each of these beats into Y partials, into 5. Now we're in quintuplet world. And then gonna draw it up. Obviously, the bass is on the beat. And then regroup all of these partials into groups of X. Now we have groups of 4 quintuplets. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. And as with any oops, that was actually incorrect.
Graham, 1 minute.
All right. Something like that. And then you draw it up. Oh wow, look at this, it's all redivided. Sorry for the messy handwriting. And then I basically take away all of the unneeded sounds and partials. So this would essentially, I'll just go ahead and start fresh here. It'd be a quarter note quintuplet, 16th note. We'd have, dotted 8th quintuplet. I'm trying to go so fast. And then, of course, these are like bracketed little quintuplets. And the last thing I always like showing for cross rhythms is that it will always be a palindrome. A successful cross rhythm will always be palindromic, just the way it would divide out. You can actually see that here. We have quarter note quintuplets, a 16th note quintuplet, dotted 8th, splitting the middle of the beat. And so it's just a fun way to go, to crunch out crazy cross rhythms. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. And so I'm trying to give these crazy high schoolers the right tools to successfully live out their internet memedom. That's what I had to prepare. I think that's what I got.
Fantastic. Thank you so very much. I like that you tied it back to high schoolers and memes.
Oh, absolutely.
Because that is like what is most important to them at this phase of their musical life.
Absolutely. And I just wanted them to do it the right way. Thank you.
All right. Well, we've got two really, really great presenters with all sorts of cool ideas. The Joe stuff is going to have me, just like my head spinning for I think the next couple of years. Actually, I've just at the National was the closest I've gotten to Delsarte and to meet Joe Williams just for a little bit. I'm absolutely intrigued and can't wait to continue to learn more and more. And then we can talk about cross rhythms and all the fun ways and sort of intricacies of how we might use that material and why. I think one of the things that I think is really interesting about cross rhythms is that it seems to be a pretty standard fodder, and if you do any slightly advanced Dalcroze pedagogy, a curriculum, it seems that we bump into the cross rhythms pretty early and pretty regularly. It's something that I feel like most people teach some bit of, and yet I don't think we always talk about why, or like what's so good about it, or how, what's the payoff. And so maybe we can talk about that a little bit today. Before I go any further, anybody will have a question or a comment for either of our presenters? I mean, I'm ready to go, but I'll gladly. Francoise. Oh, you're muted.
Okay. Yes, thank you very much. It's very interesting. Talking about those cross rhythms and those polymeters, I personally like to talk about 3 with 4 or 4 with 5 instead of against. Just it's a detail, but when students start to learn that, there is a struggle with this word, I have to do something against something else. It's just my perception that saying with, I'm putting something upon something else, and I'm trying to have them live together as well as they can, That's it.
Absolutely. Actually, we have we like to call writing that out the resultant rhythm. Instead of drawing my quarter notes down here and my quarter note quintuplets up on top, we actually I agree, I write them together, showing them live within one measure.
That's very nice. I'm wondering if different languages have different ways of saying, do they say 3 against 4? Does anybody have, are there any other languages that have a different word than against, just as part of their practice? And Francoise, thank you for that. I think I will gladly start to change some of my wording. I agree with that thought. Jennifer. Oh, your Bluetooth, I'm guessing.
Can you hear me?
Now we can.
Okay, great. Speaking of cross rhythms, I live with a drum set player, and he's a master at all of this and the composite rhythms and everything. And I was just wondering if there are many drum set players in the Dalcroze world teaching, because this stuff like the cross rhythm seems pretty second nature to them. At least it is for my partner, and he's a very good player.
I don't know what examples other people have. One of our actually, one of the founders of the Dalcroze Society of America was a man named Gene Wilmoth, who was a percussionist first. His undergraduate degree was in percussion performance, and he actually didn't teach from the piano. Actually, I never saw him teach from the piano in all the years that I ever worked with him, but he very often had different versions of hand percussion in the room and marimbas and all sorts of things. Gene was a lovely man, so there was one.
What was his last name?
Wilmoth, Wilmouth. He's who started the music company Music Innovations, which is, at least in the States, the premier place to get Dalcroze related materials all in one clearinghouse. So if you all haven't run into Music Innovations yet, MUSIK Innovations, they're good friends of ours, and we'll be at the International Conference of Dalcroze Studies in August, and we're just at the National Dalcroze Conference in Ohio. So that's Gene's, now his daughters. Well, I want to talk about the Delsarte stuff, so much more. The idea, I don't know, you said like a bunch of things that I thought were really interesting. So Trinity was the last thing that you mentioned, and then what was the one just before the Trinity, the last concept?
Correspondence.
Yeah, and could you just explain that one more time?
Yes, it's a hermetic principle from old mysticism, as above, so below.
Okay.
Meaning the invisible, so the visible, or which is scientifically as the cause, so the effect.
Yep.
As the energy upon a body, so the body's action. And it also, by referring to as the larger, so the smaller, in modern science is as the sample, so the population.
It's all very good. I mean, one of the things, and I can't even pretend to speak a little bit about Delsarte, but I think in our work in the Dalcroze classroom, it's easy sometimes to only pay attention to like the one thing and not the ways that it is implicated in a larger scope. And so like we can sometimes, like with all sorts of students, get caught on the note or the beat. And I think that so much of Jacques Dalcroze's work is trying to see things in larger contexts or being able to break it from both sides. So can we see the meta, whatever you call it, the hypermeter or the big gesture, or how large can the phrase become? So can you conceive of the 2-bar phrase? Well, what would the 4-bar phrase feel like? What if the phrase were or the gesture rather were the half a page or the whole page? Could you conceive of this piece with a gesture of that size? And then we have no trouble also then tearing it down into its smaller parts. Not to say that that's exactly the same, but I feel like I hear overtones of that in what you're describing, and that there isn't just one avenue into these things, and that actually, if you could only see half of that correspondence, you're maybe missing the actual point. It's easy to sort of recognize sometimes one thing and not recognize that it's part of a larger the wording we're using for the ICDS this summer is the larger ecology, how these things go together.
The opening line of Dr. Bob's workbook at Juilliard was a quotation from Dalcroze: "To every movement there is a sound, and to every sound there is a movement." And that is a rephrasing of the law of correspondence.
Yeah, it's very good. And I think very deep in the Dalcroze pedagogy, recognizing that we're not just doing the one thing, but that the one thing, implicates, and that there are shallow reads, and then there are deep reads, or shallow understandings of our music, and then deeper understandings of our music that require a bigger appreciation, a bigger awareness, while in these spaces, which actually isn't a terrible relay back over to cross rhythms. Look at that. See how we're doing this right here? So one of the things I love to talk about with the cross rhythms is that, so from my perspective, there are people who want to talk about 3 against 4 as an entity, and then want to talk about 4 against 3 as an entity, and then would like to talk about a composite rhythm as a thing, as a wording that is sometimes used. But oftentimes composite rhythm assumes that base that you were describing, the composite rhythm appreciated from the role of the 3 being primary, and composite rhythm being shared from the role of the 4 being primary in that 3 against 4 example. One of the things that I love about the teaching of the cross rhythms is trying to come to this place of like perfect center, where it isn't at all only from the perspective of the one side. So I have no trouble with teaching it from the role of the 4 is the groove, and now let's layer the 3 over, or the 3 is the groove, let's layer the 4 over. But in my classroom, we sort of say I can look at the one side and know the others in the background, and now I can flip and look at the other one and pull it into the foreground and have the prior in the background. And as we develop skills at going back and forth between the two, there's a place where we can look down the middle, which to me is kind of like, I don't know, I don't use the word mystical, and I don't think of it as particularly religious, but I think there's something particularly special about being able to feel both grooves equally. And I think it's really quite special when we can get in any of the cross rhythms, even the simplest 3 against 2, to try to get to a spot where I'm not wholly in only one to the exclusion of the other. Dawn, and then Teo. Sorry, Teo, I just saw your hand.
So I think what you just said, Stephen, kind of pulls the two things together a little bit, because it's like the as above, so below. I was just thinking about Rudolf Laban and his golden ratio, his platonic solids, his space harmony material, where he did something along the lines of as is big as so small. Things are based out of a geometrical pattern that relates to each other. It just gets bigger and bigger. And that kind of relates, yeah, the golden ratio, he calls the golden ratio. It does have a mystical, some people call it sacred geometry.
Yeah,
That's all I can say about it.
very cool. Teo, is your hand still up?
Yes, people in chat were asking whether there's a difference between cross rhythm and composite rhythm.
So the way, at least at Carnegie Mellon, that we use this term composite rhythm would be, we take, if you just picture the two hands, one hand doing the 3 and one hand doing the 4, they can happen at the same time, and so the cross rhythm is alive in the room. It's only the composite rhythm when we think of the two on a single plane, not separate from each other, but as though one hand were tapping all the sounds of the two hands combined. And so at that point, there's a series of sounds in the room, and yet not a perspective or a meter that they are forced to be relative to. So we could hear the composite rhythm and be able to point out the even 4 that's going on in it. We could hear that same bit of math and point out the even 3 that's going on inside it. The composite rhythm is just the tapping of those sounds as a single line or as a single plane. I don't know if Graham has a different definition or.
No, I love that. I love that.
So in Dalcroze teaching, there's a whole line of exercises where we ask people to find the composite rhythm. It doesn't have to be cross rhythms. It could be any polyrhythm. I'm doing this, you're doing that. What's the composite of the two? Can we hear it in a single plane? So it's a fun sort of mind game. Other thoughts for either of our fine?
I think Catherine had a hand up.
Yeah, Catherine had a nice comment in the chat. Maybe Catherine can share with us.
Just when you were talking about correspondences, I thought of fractals. But my question was, I don't know if this is ridiculous, but if it can be done in 30 or 60 seconds. But when Joe talked about the Trinity, I was at his class, and it was absolutely fascinating when he demonstrated, for instance, on the face, that there was a correspondence with what spirit, mind, body in small places, and he did a great demonstration with the face and kid coming home late at night or something. I don't know if it's possible to do that in the time we have.
Well, Joe, you're muted.
Yep, Joe, hang on, Joe, you're muted.
There you go.
Sorry, when chat is open, the finger button doesn't work. I can very quickly that if we consider the whole body, mind and emotions and vitality in the vital hip and abdomen section, it's repeated in a smaller version: mind, emotions and heart, and vitality. Hungry and kissy and make lovey. Love and affection and mental scrutiny and study. And so if I hold up my mouse, I can be like studying it this way. I can be looking at it defiantly, or I can be looking at it kindly and gently. Are those 3 visible to you?
Yes, extremely. How interesting.
And likewise, if I just a small tilt or more, I'm giving more and more mind. And heart right in the middle, the harmony between is only one spot. If I leave it for a moment, I've begun to change it completely.
That was blowing my mind.
Emma, you posted something in the Facebook group that was like a Delsart video. I watched a little bit of it, and I didn't really understand what I was looking at. So I don't know if Emma or Joe could talk about it. I can find a link so we can all see what it is.
Yeah, I'm familiar with that movement. It's difficult for people to sometimes do a Delsart movement-based thing unless they've actually studied it deeply. And part of the disrespect that Delsart has carried is that people feel entitled to do work with it, having looked at the pictures in the books, and not necessarily having studied it the same way one would study Laban or Feldenkrais or Kung Fu or tennis. So they would want to know more to really be a legitimate user of the work. So they took a few things and put them in and took some of the pictures of what were artistic use of it in that day and magnified them out. But that's not the same thing as the study of the work.
I will apologize for posting that joke.
Okay. That's okay. It always stimulates interest and it always is valuable.
But I think it's an interesting correlation between the Dalcroze work and what you just mentioned. I mean, recently we've had welcomed some new teachers of some of our younger children who are trained in a program for teaching the little guys. It's not Dalcroze, but it has its own curriculum. And when I first welcomed one of the teachers, he said, "Oh, I'd love to come see some of your Dalcroze classes. I do lots of Dalcroze in my teaching." And I was like, "Oh, that's wonderful." And I thought to myself, what does that mean? Like, what does he think that, what does he feel like that means? I do lots of Dalcroze in my teaching. And so, of course, I invited my dear friend and colleague to come and watch me teach. And over time, I've asked him about what it is that he does in his classrooms that's taken from what he knows about Dalcroze. And, I think that there is like a very interesting difficulty in our work of how can it be transmitted without a direct teacher, and should it be transmitted without a direct teacher, and where does all that gray space gradation come from and go to, etc. So here's a space where we try our best to share a bit of our work, but also how, it brings up lots of questions.
Yeah, that really could be a whole point of a meetup, a future meetup, the difference between reading about it, looking at pictures, looking at little videos by who knows who, and then actually studying. And so does that mean the only way is to find a master teacher and camp out, or are there in-betweens, and what do we gain and what do we lose? And these discussions have happened, over and over the generations. And so it's an important conversation to keep having. Jennifer.
I'd just be curious, Joe, how did you learn what you learned about Delsarte? And if someone wanted to learn more, where could one do that?
I had to reconstruct from old books, but rather than looking at the pictures and just doing the pictures, I poured through the books until I grasped the principles. And then went back and looked at all of the exercises to see how they were fulfillments of the principles. And then practiced them on my body for years. And began teaching them, sharing them, and studying the effect upon other people's bodies for years. And abandoned all other trainings so that I could actually conduct the experiment.
Is there a Delsarte community? Are they organized in any way?
Only what I'm trying to create little by little myself.
How interesting. Well, it's so good to meet you and to have you a bit in the Dalcroze circles, Joe. And I'll just say in front of everybody that the work that Joe presented at the national conference was greatly received. People were, as soon as it was done, it was all the buzz in the conference for the rest of the time. There were many conversations and really quite complimentary. So I'm really excited and hope to see you around and to have opportunity to learn more going forward. Yeah, Chris, nice to see you, man.
Hey everybody, Joe and Graham, thanks for your presentations. I guess I have a question to start with for Joe, and it's about when you start to read Ted Chand's book, he talks about Delsarte like sweeping the nation, like coming to the United States, and everyone wanted to learn. And I often in my own Dalcroze classroom try to make big summative sweeping statements, ta-da moments. My students don't care. They're just there to kind of move around. Maybe some memes. I don't know. I'm not watching the memes Graham's watching. But like I do the big like, see, it explains everything. And they're just like, why would I care about that? Could you tell us something about what was going on in Delsarte's own lifetime? Maybe like Darwin, people actually cared about the mysteries of the earth? Is that why they were attending his classes, or were they all trying to be actors? Thanks for taking my question.
in the United States, it was a very interesting phenomenon because I think it coincided with American culture, the beginnings of feminism, the dawn of the ending of royalties, the beginnings of new ideas, science was coming along. It was a time when all entertainment was live and it was a sin to go to the theater, but people still wanted to have entertainment at home. And so to be able to recite a poem in an entertaining fashion for your friends and neighbors was a desirable thing. It went into the education that the idea that to teach all children to be able to communicate well was to develop the wealth of the nation and to develop the abilities of all children to become who knows what they might be. So it came along with the public education ideals. So it swept through a lot of places like that.
So nice. I'm gonna just, before we run out of time, I had asked the question, why do we teach the cross rhythms? My students are university students, they're just preparing for their next big audition, and they're just trying to be really good performers on their instruments. And so, and I definitely take them through a whole series of different cross rhythms that everybody has to learn to, to perform in different ways. But they don't actually question it, but I usually question it in front of them. Why do we do this? How much of your repertoire really requires a 4 against 5? Like how much of your life could you spend playing high level rep and yet never be asked to perform a 4 against 5? And then I look at the flute players, because I know I have 2 high powered flutists in this room, and I'm like, I'm not talking about you. Obviously, you guys have to do that crap all the time. But most of the rest of us, how much of our repertoire really demands that you can do that really well? And the truth is, it's very little repertoire. It's not most of the rep. Most of the instruments and most of the repertoire, you can go a long time before you have to do really almost any of the cross rhythms. And so, like, is it really worth? And in my curriculum, like, we spend hours. There might be 6 or 7 hours total between all of the different cross rhythms that we spend really taking time to like dig in deep. And so, what's going on? Anybody ever bump into that? I don't know. Is it a friction or that kind of questioning? Like, is it really worth it? Is this really worth our time? And do you have an answer? I have answers. I have opinions. But before I just tell you what I think, anybody else? So I think it's real that it's for the rep, right? Like, but is it really worth that much time for that little bit of rep? So Emma, Chris, Graham.
I have a percussionist who lives in my house and practices a lot, and they do a lot of this stuff. They just do it. They don't think about it. Somebody taught them, you do this versus this, and it sounds like that, and go ahead and practice this for many hours a day. And so I'll be listening and I'll think, man, that is the backbone of some of the music that I love listening to more than anything in this world. And then I think, man, you're right, Stephen. I probably, as a flute player, had a lot of that, whereas most of my colleagues didn't, just because of the rep. But like, as a musician at a conservatory that studies mostly Western classical music from certain era to a certain era, didn't run into it a lot yet. Most of the music I perform, stuff that's in a jazz or South American idiom that requires improvisation, has setups of these kinds of polyrhythms as just the backbone. And when I would walk around in the jazz department, and like, I was a flute player transplanted and practicing and getting a degree that most flute players didn't have at that time from their jazz department. That's all that I'd hear, people practicing crazy stuff. I was thinking, man, I would play scales all day too if I was playing scales like this or working on this skill set. So
nice.
Some of my back pocket stuff is I wonder, man, we could use that.
Nice. I like that answer. Chris?
I was just going to say that my students don't care. It's only
Chris, tell everybody who your students are.
It's a more dangerous thing.
Where is Chris teaching? Quickly tell us. Who are your students?
I teach undergrads at like a liberal arts college in Vermont.
Okay, good.
They don't have majors or grades. It's very like we're winging it. All right. Anyway, sometimes I can get some of the male students to engage with the math part of it, and sometimes, I'm just generalizing, sometimes I get the female students to engage with the body part of it. But the students who are good at the math part, okay, now instead of this, I want you to walk one and sing the other one. No, they fall over. The ones that can sing and walk, when I ask them to write it out, their brains explode. So they come in with this cultural division. I'm good at one and not the other. I'm good at body and not mind, or I like feelings, but I don't like math, or the other way around. Anyway, that's what I have to add.
Okay, Graham.
Well, Emma, I love that you brought up like jazz and just non-classical music, because there is kind of a backbone of a lot of music and improvising. Like if you need something different to frame your solo, you can kind of have like a rhythmic motif of a cross rhythm. And it's like, oh damn, like that spices it up quite a bit. I will say, Chris, making up like why getting that big aha moment. I had, and this ties back to what Stephen was saying, is I try to eventually make the connection between cross rhythm and harmony, and eventually have the mic drop moment that like an octave to the interval of an octave is a 2-against-1 cross rhythm. And then, building on, wow, look at this. We are embodying not only this rhythmic concept, but embodying a harmonic concept as well. And I think if you can get to a really compelling place, I've had students kind of buy into that a little bit. They're like, oh shit, I am a fifth right now. I am a perfect fifth, this 2-against-3 or whatever. I always kind of like having that unveiling.
That's very nice.
To care a bit more.
Just for anybody who's maybe new to the conversation, I think Graham's speaking a bit about the overtone series. Is that part of it? What you're describing, Graham? How you're thinking of that?
I'm talking about with any interval, the frequencies, how the frequencies interact. So like an octave, for every one oscillation, you have 2 oscillations.
Yeah, very good.
One. Yeah, so just embodying those.
So nice. Joe, your hand was up, and then we're getting close here.
I know there's one little, I'm very clumsy on the keyboard, but there's one little piece that the introduction I can play before I sing it for fun. And there's a triplet against the 4. When I get it right, I hear the teardrops. And that's important to me. I hear the teardrop when that note comes in on the wrong place. And that's what makes the whole song meaningful to me. And that without that 3 occurring in there, that dun dun, I can't make the music cry.
Nice.
So emotional reason for trying to get it.
I think actually what Joe's describing is quite similar to one of the things that I'm partial to when trying to talk about all of this. So I certainly don't disagree with anything that's been shared just now. These are all really nice examples of ways that it can feel relevant. I think of it as it's like 10% useful for the rep that my students are going to go on to play, whether it be the tradition, the canon, or it be something more improvisatory, or forever. And I really think that, and at least in the way that I use the cross rhythms, is that it's examples, it's like very clear examples of deeply embodied groove. So the idea is that for me, I can have you do this rhythm and that other rhythm at the same time and tell you to pay attention to them. And can you feel them both? And can you feel them both separately or together or whatever? And if they're so kind of similar, that is, if they're part of this in the same meter or have a sort of a consonant groove about them, it's sometimes hard to tell, am I doing one and then the other, or do they just kind of feel the same? And one of the nice things about even an early 3-against-2 lesson, let alone any of the ones that are more advanced, is that there's very little confusion in the room if I'm feeling the 2 and now I flip and I feel the 3. Like that's like an extreme, at least to me, those are at the beginning, they're vastly different feels in the room. And so much of the way I think of the Dalcroze training is that we are trying to learn to feel more deeply. We're trying to can I really get it? Like, can I get the bodied version of this thing that maybe I was thinking? So again, we've mentioned math a couple times here, but can I get it into an embodied kind of way where I understand the gesture or the motion of this versus that? And so what I love about the cross rhythms is that they happen at the same time, but they're really different feels. Like they're hard to confuse one with the other. And so I know when I'm in the one, and then when I can get out of the one and into the other, I know I'm in the other. And then again, that idea of looking between the two becomes like extra important or valuable as I was able to sort of, I went through the friction of the one against the other. And so when we learn to do it in an example that to me is as clear as a, as a 3 against 4 or a 3 against 2 or a 4 against 5, any of those, now I can go into some other piece more standard. I'm in some 4-4 thing. And then I think, well, what's the difference between feeling it in the big 2 versus feeling it in 4? So do I feel the half note groove versus the quarter note groove? And do I really deeply understand the difference between those? Or were they so similar at the beginning, I just always kind of mix them up? And so to me, the cross rhythms are a really great way of sort of pointing out that you can have more than one deep feel in the same space and recognize like how impactful of a shift it can be in your own aesthetic, your own working. So that's what I like about them. Yeah, Veronica.
Okay, I'm going to be the timekeeper. We do want to move on to the last topic, and I think it's important. I'll tell you briefly why. I have heard my Dalcroze friends with more experience talk for years and years about Geneva and the ICDS conference, and eventually I decided I'm going to go. But like that's only now, right? And like people keep asking me because they think I know what it's like, and I actually don't know. So I would like to ask Emma and Stephen just to tell us a little bit about what it's like to go. What information can you share that is not on the websites for both these conferences? And if anybody here wants to add anything, I know some people here are longtime Dalcrozians, but also just know that I have a feeling a lot of people are going to watch this part on our recorded archives because I think this is a big question in our community.
Yeah. I've spoken so much today. I'm going to not start, but I would love to invite Francoise. I could talk for the next hour about that answer. But I'm not going to. I wonder if Francoise might take my turn and talk just for a moment about what was it like to be in Geneva last time, and how do you what is special about that interaction?
Well, it's very special because you meet so many different people, many cultures, and it just opens up your mind because Dalcroze, it's like an ocean of things that you can put together and many ways of understanding it and feeling it. So you go from one lesson to the other. It's the same title, but you live something totally different, and it's so inspiring. It's so inspiring, so there are so many things that you cannot go through everything, but it's a unique way of really meeting the big picture of the Dalcroze approach. And I think that's very important.
Emma, do you want to?
I'll go on ICDS for a moment, even though we have John here who could probably speak for days about this. I was lucky enough to receive a bursary from ICDS in Vienna. It was my first time getting to meet Paul Hill. It was some of my first connections with even some of my American colleagues. My first time presenting a workshop that I was teaching to adults as a Dalcroze person, Dalcroze licentiate, and had some of my teachers in the room to take a class from me using my primary instrument. It was a huge deal for my life, and it changed everything. I went from there to record an album that was 100% different than it would have been if I had not been in those rooms with those people. And I will say that those connections that I've made from ICDS to ICDS has changed the trajectory of who I will work with and study with and learn from. And here we are today because of many of those connections.
Yeah. Both places are amazing places just to meet people. We mentioned earlier on about Aneta and the kind of, there's to me, a slight Polish, subset of attentions that just seem to be kind of embraced there, maybe a little differently than there are in other places. And every time I've gone to Geneva and I find the same thing at the ICDS, these are international conferences. So it's not just like the Pittsburgh crew. It is like there are people coming from completely different histories, and each of these places have their own ways of specializing or valuing aspects of the work that you wouldn't even recognize if you've only ever worked with your teacher. And so getting a chance to go to either of these big conferences and have a chance to be around other ideas is a big deal. Jennifer?
I was wondering, in terms of like the audience, that the people who attend, are most of them highly experienced in Delcros? Have they studied? Are there some prerequisites for certain classes?
So I don't believe there's prerequisites for in either place. The Geneva will have definitely more people who are Delcrosians or have Delcros background. The ICDS works pretty hard actually to say, if your work or interests in any way overlap with this space, this is the conference for you. And so we try really, I mean, both places are very welcoming. So there's no club or anything. But the ICDS, part of the point of ICDS is how wide of a net can we throw out? Like, how far reaching can your research be? If it overlaps with the Jacques Delcros agenda in any way, we're really interested in featuring it at ICDS. And in Geneva, they also will feature talks and late breaking research. But a lot of what goes on there, at least in my past experience, is kind of like more down the middle. You know, a lot more. These are sort of some of our histories, and these are some of the most in Geneva. It's many master teachers with the Diplôme Supérieur, just teaching class after class, and you can take a class with everybody, which is so exciting. And then at ICDS, there'll be a little bit of that, and a lot of people who are just who are researchers of one sort or another, practicers, you know, who are practitioners of the work, either as teachers or as whatever their version of research is. And we have a way to all learn from the ways that people are sort of expanding the work.
I will jump in to say, I feel like at ICDS, I'd done a lot of conferences where I had participated in classes, and that had transformed me, like what Francoise was speaking of, which will for sure be how the Congress is. And also performances of Delcros and seeing these different schools do what they do so beautifully. But then at ICDS, I got to walk into a room and hear somebody connect what they do in the world to the Delcros work, what they're looking at bringing forward, or an exciting new journey or pathway for this work, and how it connects to other places in the world. To me, that was really amazing, and all of a sudden I didn't feel so alone in that I am this type of person that does this work. And like for example, today we are getting a chance to kind of see people's windows into how they teach and what they're doing and how it connects.
We are at time. We're actually a minute over, which is a little bit against the rules here. We try to start and end on time. I want to thank Joe and Graham for giving us and being so disciplined with your 5 minutes. You're amazing, both of you. Thank you for that. But you see, we have no trouble filling up the time, even with those little bits of ideas. I hope everybody will come back. If you're catching just the recording of this meetup, please join us live at the next one. There's a subscribe to our calendar, and the dates will import into your digital calendar in your time zone. So you don't have to do any math to figure out what time these meetings are if you just subscribe to the calendar. Thank you so much, everyone, for participating. And I'm gonna close the recording. Thank you all.